All right, so last video we went over like some of the basic tools in the map editor itself, like the types of maps that you can have, and then like kind of like my rough draft thought process going in. So I just wanted to bring back the rough draft just one more time so you kind of get an idea of what I was going through. You'll see it throughout the video a lot. I kind of just stop every now and then. That's probably me alt tabbing just to, look back at the rough draft or just make sure I'm on track for what I'm trying to do. And then it's going to be each to their own preference. Some people like to like listen to like a video in the background or like some high jam music. For me, it's usually like I'm listening to a podcast or maybe I'm just putting on some lo-fi, something like that. Just kind of relaxing, like I treat map making more like an art form and like a art process than it is like a very serious like this has to be this. So I'm just here having a good time and relaxing. So come on this journey with me. All right, finally getting into making a map. We're just gonna do grass, temperate, 99 by 99. No fancy palettes or anything on like this. If you do want to use those, just reach out to whoever made them. Pink, Lad. I know there's some other guys like Widow, Frenzy. I don't think Frenzy's really around anymore, but just ask them to make sure it's okay to use their assets. It's not cool just to rip their idea. As you can see here, I don't really have an idea for or a name for the map yet. I'm just doing map idea, and I did make it unpacked because I am going to have to put the Raggle rules and all that stuff in later. So first thing I always do when I'm finding a map or making a map is find that center. Since this is going to be that 45-degree diagonal map, true center is not super important, but it is just helpful to know. As you can see, I was very, very off instantly, but sorry, I'm going to find it here in just a second. And then as you can see, I'm using copy and paste as like a measuring tool a lot. If you know that you pasted 20 cells one way and then the other side's going to be 20 cells the other way, and that'll be the same. So I found the middle, and then now I'm just making this diagonal through. This diagonal line is actually really important for the way that I make 45-degree maps, since it keeps me in check of where that middle line is. And then you can see I kind of split off where the true middle is with those 2 extra squares of water, but that's, like I said, middle of the map's not super important here. It's just more that big diagonal line that's going to make all the difference. So after I found the middle, usually the next thing I'll do is mark off like the important spots, like ore mines or spawns are also really important. Once you kind of get those narrowed down is where you can go into like other major features like cliffs, or sometimes I'll do like capture rules too if those are like going to be really important on the map or something that I'm really kind of trying to focus on. But normally it's just the spawns and the ore mines, and then I'll go from there. So this is what I was meaning by using that diagonal line through the middle to help form a perfect square. As you can see, the southeast corner and the northwest corner are directly on the middle line, so I know that those 2 points, the 2 spawn points, are even. Other than that, I could have used the reciprocal method here, but this is just highlighting one way to do it. So this part here, all I'm doing is using buildings to measure like the distance you can crawl. I don't like using the MCV since I know the MCV is 4x3 and the War Factory is actually 3x3. I'll use the racks and the power plant and everything, but again, it doesn't really matter. And then once again, I use the War Factory as a ref instead of actually using the ref model. It's just a little easier to like kind of contextualize than it is using the ref. Even though the ERC ref is a square, it's just like that little extra nib on the top kind of confuses me. And again, it's important to note, since this is weird on like uneven buildings, I'm using hospitals instead of power plants, and that's just because the power plant's the 2x3. So the bottom side is going to have a little bit easier building towards the ore than the top right side will. But at the end of the day, as long as everything's the same distance, it's not going to matter too much. As long as you can get there with the same amount of buildings, fine. Maybe if one side can get there with a building less, then it's gonna happen. There's not much you can do with it just due to the size and shape of buildings, but something to just keep in mind when you're making them. Going back to the order of creating maps, generally I draw inspiration from other map makers like I Like Men, and Elevation really inspired me to make Wormrot, and it's kind of funny that we both I think used elevation a little bit to make another map, with Duskwood and Wormrot being kind of very similar. So I'll start with that sketch like I've shown before, and then generally my maps have like one major feature that I want to focus on and maybe a few minor features. That major feature tends to be like a gimmick, and honestly, like the connotation of the word gimmick tends to have like a negative light, but it doesn't mean gimmicks are necessarily bad. It just means like like something to highlight. You can have really good gimmicks like on Jungle Boogie or Elevation with the gem mines. Like those gem mines are absolutely a gimmick, but they work really well on that map. Or you're gonna have really bad gimmicks where it's just like here's water on the map, and with naval balance, that's terrible. But stay tuned for that naval balance coming up. After I've mirrored all the major features, not necessarily have them like completely fleshed out, just for like the water paint brush that I use is all set there. Sometimes I'll go in with capture rules, or sometimes I will just completely flesh everything out. But capture rules are definitely the biggest feature on the map. That's generally where I'll have a better understanding of where they're going to want to be. Obviously I have my rough draft and they're kind of placed there, but it's not really to scale, and you got to think of like time to travel there. Is it going to be more sense to get an HC Ranger to go for that second little derrick, or is this something I can go with off my double ref army and be safe at, or is it a little too risky? So you got to keep that in mind. Going back to the design process a little bit, like I said, sometimes I'll do like the major features first, sometimes I'll do the ORA patches first. Sometimes I'll just mirror the whole thing, or sometimes I'll sketch out one half and then I'll mirror. It just kind of depends on my mood, I guess. One of the tricks that I use though, and I think it's actually really helpful, is I kind of paint with water, as you'll see a lot. That helps me really get like these irregular shapes of cliffs, so it's not just like very binary where it's one cliff's facing this way, one cliff's facing this way. If you just kind of paint with a paintbrush and then fill in the gaps later, you can use trees or debris or whatever just to kind of round out those water tiles and make it look more natural, more realistic, while still having that completely balanced thing that you're looking for. I think it gives maps a little bit more character than it would without to, and it kind of prevents that very human look where if you have a whole bunch of square cliffs, it's like, okay, that doesn't look like that actually exists. So this is little things like that I think bring the aesthetic level just up a little bit. So mirroring is one of the hardest parts about these 45-degree split maps. It's not as simple as just flipping over the X and Y axis like you can in just the kind of standard map. You also have to have that rotation in there too, so it kind of breaks your brain a little bit, and you'll definitely see me struggle a lot while I do this. And again, some of that's just rust. You do get more proficient at this the more maps you make, especially of the same type. But fortunately, there's like some really helpful things to remember when you do mirror. If it's just like a single cell, and you'll see this pretty later in the video when I'm going over like single pieces of debris and trees, you can kind of use that reciprocal of, if your spot's at 17.1, then 117 is going to be the opposite of that on the other side of the map, and you can just place there. And then that middle line that I create is also really helpful for mirroring. If you drag one corner and you go across to the other side and are diagonal, and the two corners match up, and then the two other corners of the square should be on that diagonal line that you're in the middle. If those are even, then you know that you're perfectly mirrored there. So that'll help with finding the bigger shapes and stuff like that. But You'll see it a lot where I'll kind of paint just randomly somewhere on the map, the opposite. If like I'm doing ore, then I'll paint ore where it needs to be rotated and XY flipped, or if I'm doing cliffs, I'll do the same thing. And some of it's just trial and error because, like I said, it does rack my brain a little bit. And then, if I can work in that reciprocal method, that's great. Occasionally, my brain just doesn't want to work properly, and I'll have to kind of manually put in that diagonal through the middle, and I'll use like crates or concrete walls or just some sort of actor to kind of visualize it for me, and that really helps me get through there rather than continue suffering. Should also mention that the reciprocal method only works on maps that are split on this angle from the top left to the bottom right. If you're split from the top right to the bottom left, that reciprocal value doesn't work anymore. You'll still have like that perfect square value to work with it as long as you have that diagonal line through the middle. And I guess the only other way you can really do it is just to kind of manually look at the XY coordinates and kind of figure out there. But those maps are a little bit harder, but not too much. It's just something you have to work with. Let's kind of rehash the pros and cons of this type of map again. So this map was 99 by 99. So thanks to our good old boy Pythagoras, we're going to know that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So 99 times 99 is 9,801. Times that by 2, you get 19,602. And the square root of that is going to be just about 140. So you can see that we're getting almost 40 more cells just from the diagonal, which is going to make this map feel a lot bigger than it actually is. This is, obviously we're not going to use every single one of the cells on this map. There's going to be some dead space. I think that's natural, but it allows you to have a smaller map but still feel big. Whereas if you just have the traditional XY mirrored, you'd have to have quite a big map just to get it to feel kind of similar to this. So that's going to be the big advantage there. And then again, the cons of this map, like you can see from the rough draft, I'm going to have ore kind of in the middle, which is technically a cardinal sin. I'm going to try to balance it out by making one a little bit more valuable than the other, but have it so it's not super more valuable than the other. It's going to be very hard to take both corners of this map, and then if you do that, then obviously you're going to win. But that's no different than taking your opponent's natural in a XY mirror map. So additionally, as you can see, the spawns are actually going to be really close, so there's going to be some possibility for open shenanigans or all-ins, stuff like that. I think, all-ins are part of the game, whether you like it or not, and they are very frustrating to deal with sometimes, but not every map needs to have the opportunity, but there should be some maps that it's, feasible to do. It doesn't even have to be all-ins, just some early pressure can make a big difference, and that's impossible to do if the maps are very farther apart on spawns. So as you can see, I'm still just I'm polishing up the major features and a little bit of the minor features with the fences around the capturables and everything, but I still haven't done the ORA yet on this map, and that's just because this map is going to be a little bit more open, so I have more room to play with the ORA. Once the map starts getting choked off and you have these really big long features when you're trying to make these mirrored ORA fields and everything, you really have to get into that copy and paste filter, and that can just get a little bit annoying and kind of mess up with your rhythm a little bit. So in this case, I didn't have to worry about it too much, but just something to keep in mind. Now that we got the major features out of the way, I'm going to start moving on to ore. As you can see, I'm starting with the spawning ore since that is kind of an important factor of the game. Typically 18,000 is on the lower end. I've seen maps as high as 30,000. I think that's a little bit high. Somewhere between 22 and 28 is typically where I go, and I think this time ended up somewhere around 25. So one thing that's really helpful when you're doing ore like this is just to pay attention to the total ore value. When I'm going back and I'm pasting through, I just want to make sure that they're the same amount afterwards, or I'll copy and paste the same ore field, and then I'll know the total number it should be. So when I go and make the actual ore field, as long as that's even, it's good. If they're off, then I know I messed up somewhere, and that happens a lot. Obviously, if somehow I messed up and it happened to be the perfect amount, then I just probably won't realize it, but it's a lot easier to do this and keep your fields consistent than it is just to kind of YOLO it and let it go, let it be free. For like the total amount of ORA map, I think it's about 100k is like the medium for a 1v1. I've seen maps as low as like 70k or 60k is like on the really low end. I've seen maps as high as like 140k. That's also on like the really extreme high end. So you definitely have a lot of freedom there. Don't feel like you need to like make it 100k every time or it needs to meet this minimum. You can have maps with a lot of ore mines and not a lot of starting ore on it, or you can have maps where the opposite, where there's a few ore mines but have a greater number of ore. It's just, that's another gimmick thing that you can try, and there's no like one right way to do it. Generally, 7 ore mines is like, I mean, even that nowadays is kind of on the low end. 6 is definitely the low end for competitive. 7 used to be the standard. I think 8 is kind of creeped into more of the standard now that people have really good macro, and I've seen some maps with like 9 or 10, but those tend to be on the rare side. So 7 to 8 is about the average. And then of course you have gem mines and stuff like that too. So you have a lot of freedom here and don't feel like you need to be completely constrained by it. If a map plays good, it's going to play good. And if a map plays bad, it's going to play bad. And generally the number of ore or the number of ore mines on there isn't going to be the contributing factor to that. In a similar vein, you have the number of expansions on a map. Excluding the spawn and your typically 1 or 2 starting fields, usually you want like a minimum of 2. I've seen maps that have upwards of 3 or 4, and I mean it can be fun. As soon as you get past like 3 or 4 though, it kind of starts to become hard to actually ever control them. I mean, this is gonna go into like my philosophy of playing the game and stuff, but like on a map like Algeria that I think it had like 5 or 6 expansions each, it almost becomes to a point where you really just have one main base and then your expansions are just for refs and you don't have anything else. So if you have like 2 or 3 expansions on a map, then like each one of those could become a base. Whereas once you start having more spots, then they're less like an expansion of a base and it's just a place to replace a ref. So keep that in mind. The distance between ore patches matter too. You know, you could have ones that are kind of close that you can kind of crawl to with 1 MCV. You can have ones that are far away that you want to eventually get to. And, you know, you can vary it up between like double ore mine, single ore mine, stuff like that. Generally, you don't want ore mines in the middle. There is ways to make it work. I think like excavation from Pink Thoth is like a decent example. Like those, I think I've seen taken once in a game. They're not super impactful. They are like a bonus if you can control them, but they're very hard to control and like they're very closed off, so you can't build a big base by them. So that's just something to keep in mind. You don't want to make the middle too powerful, but you can have stuff there. It's just you have to, you know, work with it, and don't be afraid to make a revision. You know, if it was too powerful, you can always come back and make an edit and make it worse off. So. Now that all like the major features are pretty much done, I was kind of going back with that second to last like final edit of like the major features, and that's just like putting in the debris and the trees around cliffs and stuff to make it a little bit more naturalistic and less barren. I typically save this for now just because, you know, it's going to be a lot of placing a few of types of actors or pieces of debris, and it's going to be a little bit time consuming, and if I want to make like major changes, then having to undo all that is kind of sucky. So that's about now when I do once the ore's done, right before I go into like some of the finer details on the map. After capturables, I typically go to roads. I think roads are something that can kind of be overlooked for the impact they have on a game. Uh, Everything moves faster on roads, so if you have roads that go to ore, that can be a quick way to get an MCB there faster. Or if they're going to the oil derrick, it does matter. So you want to make sure the roads are also balanced. It's not a huge feature, but it does matter to some things. I know like one of the things I like to do is kind of make it so one road goes to like an ore that doesn't necessarily belong to you, and that can give you like a reason to kind of do something strange on the map where you go with a fast MCV to steal your opponent's ore and confuse them if you can pull it off. You do have to be a little careful with roads, kind of like I've said before with the debris that is on there. They can be really annoying and they can kind of inhibit free movement if you're not careful with them. So there's just some road segments that you'll see me a lot where I just kind of cover it up with some other pieces. And there's some kind of fancy stuff you can do with that. Unfortunately, those probably won't work with the remastered assets anymore, but we'll have to see once those get to RA. One final note to be wary of roads is the shape that they take. There was a map I made a long time ago that I thought had a cool idea on it, put the roads on it, they were looking good, and then I kind of presented it to people, and they're like, your roads look like two dicks in the middle. So once a map like that gets a name or a nickname like that, like you can't stop it, and that's all people are gonna ever see. Net Nazgul a long time ago, he had a map called River of Gold, and there's like a thin strip of ore all through the middle, and it got nicknamed River of Piss, and it just never lived that down. The map was okay. You actually saw it against me and Mint in that best of 11 series I did, but it was forever known as the River of Piss afterwards. So we're about almost done with these roads. Roads are a great tool to kind of fill in the emptiness of a map without actually adding a whole bunch of blocking stuff, and I'll get into that a little bit later when I start adding trees and debris, but it's very easy to just add roads and make your map look good. It's very rare to have too much roads or too many roads on a map, and even then it's just a fact of like them just not looking like they make sense. Like you don't want to have a bunch of roads that just do the same job as the one that's like 2 cells away. People have tried to make like an urban style RA map, and that'd be really cool. It's just with the nature of the buildings, it doesn't look that great, but there's been some times that I've tried it and I think it's cool. More roads on a map it can be very interesting, so feel free to try it if you're up to it. It's important to know that if you're using trees or debris, the actual like size and parts that are not traversable on, like there's a couple trees that take up 2 squares even though they look like one. There's a bunch of trees that have like holes in the middle that you can actually run through if you're not careful, and then there's just some like pieces of debris that have weird shapes to them. So the new buildable overlay is actually pretty helpful with this, so that's a great tool that is just released with this new release. So this is about the point where I kind of started coming up with an idea for the map name, and it happens with the majority of my maps. I'll go in with a name or I won't have a name at all, and then halfway through I'll come up with a name. And then 30 seconds later, I'll come up with another name. And by the end of the thing, I ended up going through like 3 or 5 names. So this one, I started coming up with an idea. I was like, it'd be cool to just put some little towns in a village here, and then went off that. Civilian buildings are another type of thing you have to be very careful of. Their size can be a deception. Like the windmill only occupies 1 cell, I think. Actually, I don't even remember. It might occupy 2. Like the skyscraper building type one definitely occupies 2. Some of the buildings, they look like they only occupy 2 cells, but they occupy all 4, and you have to be very careful with that. Is it a big balance issue? No, but it's just one of those things to be wary of. It does matter for, like on Deciduous Ring, I use them to block off ore, and so you have to kill them. And if you're making people kill like twice the many buildings, or they don't have to kill as many as the other one, that does have some more significant balance problems, but even then, such a small thing, but just something to be wary of. So now we're getting into the like final touches, adding like the aesthetic bits. Like these bits aren't strictly necessary, they don't do anything to balance. In fact, if you do them badly, they can imbalance. And that's kind of like my next thing to get into is like I'm a big fan of just doing like these single like 1 or 2 cell like pieces of debris or trees. I know some people like to do like bigger ones, and that's fine. The biggest problem is eventually like you're gonna start choking off the map, and like the more aesthetically pleasing you make the map, the more objects you put on it, the more choky it is, and that can actually have some big problems. So I tend to like to let people move their armies through freely and save like that single types of piece of debris as more just like aesthetic, or in like the very rare cases like on like some of these maps, especially these 45-degree maps, I'll put like a lot of debris just kind of to prevent base pushing. But other than that, you know, let people move their armies through. Don't like cause MCVs to not be able to deploy because there's so much debris on the field. And that's kind of my philosophy on the thing. So as you can see, for the reciprocal method, all I'm doing is I'm just looking in the top left and finding the coordinates, and then just flipping them and moving it to the other side. And the reason that I'm kind of coming back through here with these random piece of like rock debris in the water is just to kind of count, make sure I have the same number on each side. Not so much with like this type of map, but with the XY flipped maps, it's very easy to count wrong because they don't it's not so rigidly split. And so it's just a little helpful method to make sure I'm keeping things balanced and as they should be. Now the last thing I'm doing is I'm just adding those rock and debris bits. I don't like to have them perfectly mirrored here since they're just taking up one bit of space. I think it's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing and a little bit more natural just if they're like randomly placed. You know, they're still accomplishing the same thing. As you saw really quickly right there, I'll quickly turn the whole ground into water and then turn it back into the terrain. That just gets rid of any like blaring like copy and paste errors. Sometimes if you copy and paste the same cell over and over and over again, you'll see like a line and it kind of looks awkward. That just cleans it up real quick. The last step that I typically do after a map is finished is I'll load it up in the single player, and I'll like kind of put some MCVs where I expect them to be and just kind of see what the reach is. Sometimes you'll be surprised at how quickly or how much that an MCV will cover. So that's kind of important to know. After that, I'll usually take a screenshot of it because I like to add those with my maps when I upload them. That makes it easier for people to see the actual features on the map, not just the preview. And then other than that, if you've like used a custom palette, then it's nice to kind of go back and alter that map PNG file just to look more like it is. It's always nice to see the preview look like the in-game terrain. Unfortunately, it won't do anything for the minimap, but who uses the minimap anyways? And then the last thing you can really do on top of that is just to lock that preview image. That way, if you ever make changes to the map, it's not going to lose that image. So unless you make major feature changes and you actually need to like redo the image, it'll be fine. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys enjoyed just relaxing with me along this trip and making this map. Will this map play good? I'm not so sure. It wasn't exactly my most inspired idea. You can kind of see where I kind of drew inspiration from was like a little bit of discovery, but just on that 45-degree split map instead of a traditional XY. And yeah, if you guys have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to drop a comment below or any of that type of stuff. Or if you just want to argue with me, go ahead. Absolutely. I don't care. But I'll be back next week or next time with the just a standard XY build of a map, and you'll kind of see my different methods there too. So I'll see y'all next time.